everyone, and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing another book in the medieval Craftsmen series that I have been reading. This one is English Tylers by Elizabeth Eames or Eames. This is what the cover looks like. I did order it from another library, so they put their sticker on it. There's nothing I can do about that. It is a shorter book, a little under 70 pages, and I've already read other books as mentioned in this series, such as Scribes and Illuminators, Glass Painters, and Embroiderers. So if those sound interesting, those will be linked at the end of the video, but we're going to be talking about English Tylers today, what they are, what the contents of this book is, or are, what you can expect if you get this book, as well as my overall thoughts, things I liked and things I didn't like from this book. So let's dive in and talk about English Tylers. There's really only 4 main sections in this book if we look at the content. So I'm just going to go through them and kind of talk about what is in that section of the book, what's discussed, and maybe a fun fact or two, so you can get an overview of what the content of the book is and decide if this is a book that you want to read. And then I'm going to go back and discuss things I liked and didn't like about the book overall. So that's going to be the format of this book review. So the first section is how Tylers worked, and this is just the structure, the day-to-day life, and how things happened with tiling in England. And again, the focus of this book is just English Tylers, so we're just focusing on that one geographic area. Something that was interesting to me was that Romans actually brought this to England. There was no tiling before that, at least that's what this book does seem to imply. So the Romans are really the catalyst for bringing it to this region. Of course, the Romans then pulled out of England, and that didn't mean the tiles came with them. This tradition continued, but the focus of this book is primarily those tiles in the Middle Ages, which is of course well past when the Romans were there. But the Romans kind of kicked this off. And in this beginning section, we really get the distinction between roof tiles, which were more practical, although they could have a decorative element, versus floor tiles, which were really more for the decorative element. So we do have these roof tiles, which were the ones to keep things from coming inside a house, like a roof. And then we had floor tiles, which were much more decorative. Things really kicked off with the roof tiles post 1666, which is when there was a big fire in London. And at that point, it was decreed that everyone should have tiled roofs, because tiled roofs were better for fire prevention than the thatch roofs that a lot of people were using. Of course, this caused a lot of problems. First of all, there wasn't the ability for craftsmen to focus on any sort of craftsmanship from that 1600. Of course, that's a little bit past the medieval era, but at this time there wasn't the ability to focus on like the craftsmanship, because there was just a desire to get everyone having tile roofs. And as you can imagine, the rich people jumped the line and were able to get those tiles faster than the people who had less resources and less money, who maybe just had to be without a roof for a little bit while they waited for their fireproof roofing to come in. So that's the general idea of how tilers worked, their role. That's what's covered in section 1. Section 2 is actually about the manufacture. So this one is called Materials and Methods of Manufacture, and that's just how these tiles were created. And this is where we get more into the detail between those roof tiles and the floor tiles. And the floor tiles are really the ones that have the more decorative, artistic element, although there were decorative and artistic elements that could be included in those roof tiles. But after section 2, the focus is really on floor tiles. So 2 is much more pragmatic. It's just the manufacture and how they were done. The part that really impressed me from section 2 is the temperature control. So the kilns that the tiles were being fired in had to maintain a certain temperature, and without precise instruments, this was something that had to be done through judging maybe the color of the tiles that were in the kiln and other methods, but they were able to accomplish this, and many things were fired correctly. Things were also not fired correctly at different times, because temperature control is obviously not an exact science if you don't have the exact instruments to measure the fire, but I was impressed at how much they were able to get these temperatures inside these kilns exact, and that had to have been something that I would imagine was taught to like an apprentice. Things to look for to make sure your temperature was the correct, or your fire was the correct temperature. I have to imagine too, they weren't like, we need to get it to 1100 centigrade. Like, that was not something they would be doing. They would just know that the temperature had to be a certain level of heat in order to get those tiles fired correctly. As mentioned, the floor tiles are really where the tiling stands out. And for that reason, most of the rest of the book is taken up with these floor tiles. So the next or the final two sections are monochrome floor tiles and two color decorated floor tiles. So the two different types of floor tiles, and I'm just showing off some here. Two different types of floor tiles, and because they're the more artistic ones, they're the ones that take up the rest of the book. And I'm showing off some from those. These are where you really get those wealthy, really intricate, interesting tiles on the floor. So quite high level, but they're able to squeeze in more than I anticipated in the 4 sections that are in this book. Now, the end of the book, kind of at the end of those two color decorated floor tiles, they also squeeze in what happened to tiling. We've already touched on the fire of 1666, but also as Gothic architecture kind of fell out of style, the desire to have decorated floor tiling fell out of style too, and that was what kind of led to the end or changes in how tiling was done. And then of course around that time we're moving out of the Middle Ages, and then the scope of the book is no longer in play. So that is what's covered in English tilers. Now let's get into some of my thoughts about this book. The first thing is I like the detail. I like the fact that this was just English tilers. Now I'm not entirely sure why they chose to zoom in on just English tilers. If I had to suspect, it's because either it's too broad of a topic to cover tiling in the entire continent, or it was substantially different from tiling on the continent and it would take too long to differentiate it if trying to do a broad overview. So I'm not sure why they zoomed in or why they just chose to focus on English tiling, but I like and appreciate the focus. I also liked that they had a map, and this is one of my pet peeves, is when you do not have a map. Now, sometimes when a book doesn't have a map, but it's located in something like the United States or maybe even Canada, where I'm slightly more familiar with it, I can forgive them because I understand where things are, but I appreciate having a map in these sort of books where you're going to be referencing a lot of locations, because not everyone might be from the country that you're writing about. In this case, we have England here. So putting a map here is, I think, nice and important for readers who might not be from the region that you're from. And again, I think even books that reference a lot of places in the United States should include a map, even if I don't need to reference it. I just think it's helpful and adds a little something to the book. So they have a map. Yes, you immediately get points for having a map. I think that there was plenty of beautiful examples in this book, and I'm going to show you some of my favorites. However, one of my complaints is a common complaint. This one is my favorite. One of my complaints is a common complaint, though, from other books in this series, and that is the inclusion of black and white images. Now, I'm not totally against black and white, and I understand that the black and white imagery could be a cost-saving method. So if I had to guess, printing in color is more costly than printing in black and white, especially when you're printing 10,000 books or however many were in this run. But sometimes when discussing something that's artistic, the color is important. So I'm not sure why the color was left out of the book. And there's plenty of examples of black and white pieces that I feel like should have been in color. So maybe they could have still done some black and white, but if they had, like, here's 2 examples that I feel like should have been in color. There are some things, like if you're just showing the pattern or how things fit together, could be done in just black and white. But there were other examples like these here on page 31 or 30 and 31 that I feel like would have benefited from being in color. For example, this one here on page 31 says, drawing of a different arrangement of alternating green and yellow mosaic tiles in concentric circular bands. Green and yellow? It would have been helpful to have this in color. Again, I understand there may have been cost-saving method or cost-saving ideas that went into this. However, I just think that some of these probably should have been printed in color, and I would have preferred it to be printed in color. I do think that they did a good job, especially as we got further into the book and we started focusing on those decorative floor tiles, of including good examples of the level of detail that were included. Just the level of detail. This is an example of one that could be just in black and white, because it's not, the color isn't as important in this diagram, but as you can see, they do a good job of selecting tiles that have a good amount of detail. So I appreciate that, and the amount of detail we were getting. Like, look at these in the later sections of the book. Just show you a few more. I think English Tylers was a really, really good book. It's a really good introduction book. The book is a bit older, if I had to guess. Yeah, published in or copyright 1992. So I do wonder what we've learned since the publication of this book in English tiling. There seems to be a lot of archaeological discoveries that are mentioned in this book. So I wonder how much more we've discovered since that time, since that was about 30 years ago or a little over 30 years ago. But overall, I think this is a really good introduction. So if English tiling is something that you're interested in learning about or something you didn't know you were interested in, but after watching this video you are, then I think this would be a good book to start to kind of get an overview, and then you can decide what's most interesting for you, and you can go in and do additional research and reading into those topics that are most interesting for you. And if you enjoyed this book, or you like the layout, you like these short introductions to a specific topic, in the Medieval Craftsmen series, I will have some videos linked at the end, including glass painters, embroiderers, and scribes and illuminators, which are the 3 other books in this series that I have already read that I am also enjoying. And I like this series quite a bit. I think they do a good job of getting a good introduction. So yes, if you enjoyed that, please check out my other videos. And if you have any thoughts on English Tylers, please leave those in the comment section down below. I love to receive your comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.